Welcome to West Shore Unitarian Universalist Church, a spiritual community whose hope is audacious and whose vision is for a more equitable and just world for all. I'm Elizabeth Gerenser, Worship Associate, and joining me this morning are Dave Blazer, Music Director, Megan Ross, Director of Religious Education and Engagement, Grace Durfee, Worship Associate, Christine Salante, Michael Hockman, and Bob Beamer, who are our tech folks making this live stream possible. A special welcome to our guest speaker this morning, the Venerable Shih Ying-Fa, Abbot of CloudWater Zendo, the Zen Center of Cleveland. The Venerable Ying-Fa has been a practicing Buddhist for the last 35 years. Venerable Ying-Fa has been a fully ordained Buddhist monk since 1998 and is the founder of the Nianfo Chan Order of Buddhist Monks. He founded CloudWater Zendo in 1994 and subsequently founded Zen meditation groups in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Washington State. He is active in interfaith activities in the greater Cleveland area and spent 20 years teaching Buddhism and meditation in Ohio prisons. He also teaches a weekly class on the Chinese internal art of Qigong. A warm West Shore welcome to Venerable Ying-Fa. We are pleased to welcome everyone to this space, a space which is connecting people in Cleveland and beyond to our welcoming community. There are so many joys in this world, and there's also so much suffering, so many conflicts, and not enough compassion. May our worship hour be one which magnifies our joys and brings to each of us the healing and hope we may be needing today. A special welcome to you if you're a newcomer to our community. Gay or straight, cisgender or transgender, whatever your race or ethnicity, whether you are here in the sanctuary or watching at home, you are welcome. And now some announcements from Megan.
Good morning. Welcome to everyone here in the sanctuary and to those of you watching at home. I have just a few announcements for you today. First is that parents and caregivers should have received an email this week with information about programming for children and youth. The outdoor program that we'll be offering on Sunday mornings for kids in grades 1 through 6 will begin next Sunday. So please be sure to keep an eye out for details that are being sent by email and by regular mail. Registration is required, so please register your child. We have paper forms, or we are coming into the 21st century with electronic registration, so you'll find a link for that in Friday's e-news. And as always, please contact me should you have any questions. West Shore will have a booth coming up at the Lakewood Community Fair in Madison Park on Saturday, September 11th. This fair will go on from 11 to 5, and volunteers are needed to staff our booth to talk about West Shore and let people know about our community. We also need people to donate candy and prizes. Please click the link in your e-news for more information or to volunteer. And lastly, there will be no virtual coffee hour today, but there will be a sermon chat at 12:30. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Welcome to this new day. Every week we light our chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. It is a beautiful reminder that no matter how many jarring events might happen over the course of the week, the gathered community that is West Shore Unitarian Universalist Church is a source of stability and meaning we can depend on. I have found this to be especially so during my recent struggles with my mom having a stroke And in light of that, I offer these chalice lighting words. May our path be lit by this chalice so we can see the road ahead of us, even through a veil of tears. May the light of this chalice guide us to a community filled with love, acceptance, and strength. May this chalice burn brightly so we can walk toward the light when we have lost our way and be brought to a place of peace. Amen. Let us witness to the unity of our spirit by saying together our unison affirmation words. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio su ley. Este es nuestro magnífico convenio, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor, y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. So may it be. And now we turn to our time of greeting, where we spotlight the joys and concerns of our lives. We have some birthdays to lift up of some of the senior members of our congregation. Margot Gobiel, Dolores Hannah Root, Elaine Cohen, Irene Schuster, Loretta Hollanda, and Liz Nolan are celebrating their birthdays. A very happy birthday to these folks. Among the West Shore family, the flowers for this Sunday were dedicated by Drina Nemes in honor of her mother, Edie Schwady, who would have celebrated her 93rd birthday on September 4th. Edie passed away on November 16, 2020. The floral arrangement was created by Syl Knudsen. Our healing thoughts and prayers go out to Janet French, wife of Bob, who recently had surgery at the Cleveland Clinic. She will be discharged soon to a rehabilitation site for therapy. Cards and notes are welcome and may be sent to her home address. Our healing thoughts and prayers also go out to Jody Crail, wife of Marcia, who will soon leave the hospital for a therapy center to continue treatment for septic shock. Marcia reports Jody is feeling much better now. Cards and notes may be sent to the home address. And a celebration of life for longtime West Shore member Leanne Bliss, who died on September 22nd, 2020, will be on Saturday, September 18th at 1 p.m. at the Avon Lake House. In lieu of flowers, contributions may be made to the Alzheimer's Association or to your local string music program in her honor. Let each of us now say the names of people whom we are holding in our personal thoughts and prayers this morning. Voice those names to yourself silently and prayerfully. If you are worshiping at home with us, you might want to type the names into our West Shore Facebook chat. I will pause for a moment as we do this. This has been our greeting time when we remember that we are not alone in life, but that we are connected in beloved community. Let us feel held in these loving arms. Let us now turn to our first hymn of the day, number 86, Blessed Spirit of My Life. I invite everyone to hum the song to yourself and use your inner singing voice.
I'm Grace Durfee, Worship Associate. I have to confess, I am a worrywart. Worry is the most common way for me to experience fear. I know that they say fear is false expectations appearing real, but even though most of my worries thankfully never materialize, I still give them a lot of mental energy. I think this is just how I roll. In clearing out my mother's papers, I came across old report cards from grade school. I noticed that almost every teacher commented on how conscientious I was. That's because I'm a worrier and a planner by nature. There's an interesting exercise that I learned in a coach training where you sit silently with one hand resting on each thigh. You are to sit with eyes closed and note your thoughts for a minute or two. Every time there's a thought in the future, you tap your right hand on your right thigh. Every time there's one from the past, you tap your left thigh. When you're completely in the present or don't have any thoughts, both hands rest on your legs. Whenever I've done this, I always have a lot of right thigh tapping going on. This week in particular, I've had a lot of future-focused thoughts. Many of them have been worries or fears. We are scheduled to fly to Italy on August 31st for our 30th wedding anniversary trip. Our original trip from May of 2020 had to be postponed because of COVID lockdowns. I was incredibly disappointed to cancel plans because I'd spent so much time researching the areas we wanted to visit, finding some really unique accommodations, and practicing Italian with the Duolingo app. Now I'm fearful that, again, all of the efforts I put into recreating a new itinerary may be in vain. With the Delta variant causing spikes worldwide, I'm worried that Italy may impose another lockdown or stringent restrictions. The current regulations from the Italian embassy go through August 30th, so we may find out a day before our scheduled departure that this trip has to be unraveled. And if we do get to go, I also worry that the family wedding that we're attending in Rome at the end of our trip could be a super spreader event. We will have to be tested within 72 hours of returning to the US. And a positive COVID test would require quarantining in a hotel and having to rebook return flights. I'm currently researching travel insurance options that would cover that. These are just the travel worries buzzing around my brain. Then there's the fear that the wonderful Italian food and wine will cause a painful gout flare-up for Bill. And I'm also worried about the soreness in my neck and shoulder that I've had for over a week. It may just be from swimming in the lake, but there's a fear that the course of antibiotics that I took for Lyme disease after getting a bullseye rash shortly after hiking in Connecticut may have not been enough to clear it. And I wonder if we'll really be able to get all of the needed tax information off to our accountant so that he can file by the mid-September business tax extension deadline. The list goes on and on. I do realize how toxic negativity can be. So what I endeavor to do is to flip worries and fears into blessings and positive intentions. Given the volume of my thoughts, that's a lot of mental gymnastics. This is a big reason why I meditate. I have such a busy mind with thoughts, worries, hopes, fears swirling around like the flakes in a shaken snow globe. Meditation provides an opportunity for them to settle. Typically, there's still a bit of swirling going on in my mind during meditation, but there are also blissful moments of clarity, stillness, and peace. That's the ongoing practice for me. Not getting swept up in the swirl, but letting go and relaxing into this present moment. I would still like to be a conscientious person, but I want to operate from a place of calm intention rather than worry or fear.
Thank you, Grace. We come to this place because we love what exists here. This congregation is a living entity, and like all living things, it must have nurture and sustenance. Its breath and its heartbeat, its life itself, can only be derived from its living components, us. In this spirit, all are invited to support the mission and ministries of West Shore through your financial gifts. If you are here in the sanctuary this morning, please drop your gift off in the offering box as you leave the service today. If you are participating via live stream, please consider texting your gift. Thanks for considering a gift this morning. It's only because of your generosity that we can have the spiritual community that we have. You make it possible with your generosity. These gifts include the beautiful music that we are going to hear right now, a piece called Heart Sounds by David Lance.
Let's do a short meditation. The first thing I'd like you to do is to simply hold your hand in front of you at whatever height you like and clench your fist slightly. Not real tight, just slightly. Put your attention on that fist. And now, without opening the hand, unclench it. You can feel the muscles relaxing. From that position, unclench it again. And now a third time. You know what the feeling of unclenching is now. So place your hands back in your lap and begin to breathe in and out slowly. Make sure the corners of your mouth are raised a little bit. You breathe in, and when breathing out, unclench your shoulders. So with every out breath, the shoulders relax, and relax a little more, and relax a little more. And just breathe in this fashion for a couple of minutes. That's one of the first meditations I ever learned from the Buddhist priest who was my first teacher. And you can use this in any situation. So I encourage you to practice it, relaxing the shoulders on the out-breath. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be back at West Shore after a number of years. I'd like to thank Reverend McCarr, Elizabeth here, Christine, and Grace, Megan, and the rest of the staff for all their assistance and support. And I'd like to extend my appreciation to those of you who are attending this morning, both in person and virtually. There's a lot of fear currently circulating in our society and our world. The pandemic and the politics surrounding it have stoked a number of fearful reactions in people. This has led to a lot of related effects, which I won't enumerate here, but undoubtedly a lot of people are nervous, worried, and yes, fearful. The primary narrative that has been put forth en masse, particularly on social media, can be stated very simply. Be afraid. Fear the pandemic, fear the mask, fear the vaccine, fear the government, fear anyone who doesn't look like you, fear the police, fear the politicians on the other side. And this dreary litany goes on and on and on. We try to do our best not to let fear dominate our hearts and minds. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we don't. Even so, we should never forget that fear is affecting a lot of our fellow human beings as well and leads to a lot of harm and hardship. But there is, of course, hopefulness in the midst of fear. The hopeful thing is that there are at least as many ways of dealing with fear as there are fears to deal with. Our Buddhist tradition offers several, not the least of which is the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path: right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. This list comprises the final element of the Buddha's Four Noble Truths. The first element of the Four Noble Truths says that we all experience dissatisfaction of one kind or another. The word suffering is often used to describe this dissatisfaction. The second element says that we experience suffering because we have conditioned our minds over time to develop a sense of what we call desire or craving. The original Pali word, tanha, literally translates as thirst. Number 3 sounds obvious, but you'd be amazed how many people miss this entirely. Namely, by releasing craving, we can put an end to our suffering. And of course, number 4 is the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path, which I enumerated earlier. I think it's those last 2 elements of the Eightfold Path, right mindfulness and right concentration, that are the key when it comes to dealing with fear. This is because fear manifests in the mind, and over time it migrates to the heart. From the heart, it branches out into our physical existence and manifests in everything from nervousness to even outright paranoia. In the Dhammapada, a famous collection of the Buddha's teachings delivered over his 45-year career, the Buddha addresses fear. Describing the fearful, he says, "They go to many a refuge, those who have been struck by fear. They go to the mountains and forests, to parks and trees and shrines, but none of these is a secure refuge. None is the refuge supreme. Not by relying on such a refuge can one be freed from all suffering. But one who has gone for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha sees with perfect wisdom the Four Noble Truths, which are suffering, the arising of suffering, what causes it, transcending it, and how to do that. This is the refuge," he says, "that is secure. This is the refuge that is supreme. By relying on such a refuge as this, one is released from all suffering." This is, of course, the view of only one tradition, but within this teaching are universal principles that resonate throughout all religious, spiritual, and philosophical traditions. As the Buddha points out, we can try to escape our fears by going to, say, local parks or forests, or we may depend on our religious organizations to comfort us. But ultimately, these only offer temporary relief from fear. It's when we go inside ourselves that we find the true refuge. In the Noble Eightfold Path, this going inward is called right concentration. When the Buddha refers to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, he's talking about the teacher, the wisdom that that teacher shares, and the supportive community which assists every member to realize that wisdom. You have much the same in the UU community. Your Sangha, your community or congregation, supports, uplifts, and nourishes itself through compassion, wisdom, and loving kindness, for instance. In Buddhism, we refer to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as the 3 treasures, or 3 jewels, because they are indeed precious. UUs have much the same thing. It's this vital combination of teachers, teachings, and community support that can get us beyond whatever fears we may be experiencing. As the Buddha said in that quote from the Dhammapada, by relying on such a refuge as this, one is released from all suffering. But ultimately, we have to do it ourselves. So, having established the similarities between our traditions, what can Buddhists and UUs do about fear? Well, one thing we can do is to approach the problem from the mental perspective. Buddhism is all about the mind, so that's where we generally begin when talking about these sorts of things. I have a quote from the 8th century Indian Buddhist monk Shantideva, who was a follower of what was known as the Middle Way, or Madhyamaka Buddhist philosophy. The Middle Way school taught that there is both relative and absolute truth, and that absolute truth can be understood through the relative. Shantideva's quote goes, "If you can solve the problem, then what is the need of worrying? If you cannot solve it, then what is the use of worrying?" Earlier, we heard Grace Durfee's reflection on fear, and the very first thing she said was, "I've got to confess I'm a worrywart. Worry's the most common way for me to experience fear." Worry and fear are directly related. I might tweak that last part a little by saying that worry is what eventually becomes fear. This occurs generally in situations that arise gradually instead of suddenly. If a bear charges us on a camping trip, there's no time to worry. The fear of being mauled results in us running away as fast as we can. But if we're waiting for a medical diagnosis of an uncomfortable condition we've been experiencing, there's plenty of time for our worry to become full-blown fear. What if it's cancer? What if I can't jog anymore? Most of us have experienced this sort of thing. It's very human to go through possible scenarios. We all do it. I do it too. This is just common sense, examining a situation so that we're prepared to deal with most, if not all, of the eventualities. But the more we ruminate, the closer we get to worst-case scenario country. We end up fixating on what bad things might happen to us, and this skews our view of the situation toward suffering, or at least in the direction of inconvenience. Our what-ifs start to dominate the thinking process, and if there are too many entries in that what-if column, we become afraid. Shantideva's advice is very practical. Whenever we're faced with some kind of difficulty, our mind almost instantly begins to figure out a way to get beyond that difficulty. When we've determined that there's a way or ways to resolve the situation, our worry dissipates. When we're determined that there is a way or ways to get around this, we apply the solution and everything is fine. But sometimes we have to face the fact that there are some problems that we just can't solve. The biggest problem for many people is the fact that we're all going to die, so we just can't sci-fi our way out of that one. Over the years, I've known people younger than myself who have really struggled with the inevitability of death to the point where they've become frozen in place. Their life becomes increasingly difficult. Sometimes they fall into deep depression and require counseling. I had a similar experience about 40 years ago or so while I was walking through a shopping mall in Dearborn, Michigan. I just froze in place, I'll never forget it, when the reality of my mortality really hit me hard. But fortunately for me, this event led me right to the Buddhist tradition, where I found ways of addressing my own mortality that have given me peace ever since. This is why Shantideva's approach can be useful. If you can solve the problem, what's the need of worrying? If you can't solve it, then what is the use of worrying? If the solution to our difficulties is fairly obvious, all will be well. If there's not an easy solution or no solution at all, worry is ultimately a waste of our energy. Grace Durfee told us that in her reflection. She said she still gives her worries a lot of mental energy, which only amplifies them. This creates fear a whole lot faster, like adding an accelerant to a wildfire. So, what can we do? How can we keep our worries and apprehensions from snowballing out of control faster than we can deal with them? How can we keep them from creating the suffering of fear within us? The Buddhist tradition suggests that we can use a transformational approach to deal with the kind of worry that leads to fear. This approach is the right mindfulness part of the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. Now, there are a lot of definitions of mindfulness circulating these days, but I'm going to give you the original Buddhist definition of right mindfulness. In right mindfulness, we strive to pay close attention to four things: the state of our physical body, the state of our mind, the state of our emotions, and the state of our surroundings. We try to develop the ability to keep track of these things as much as we can, day by day, moment by moment. This way, nothing can blindside us, and we can deal with any situation in both a wise and compassionate manner. The basis of right mindfulness is, of course, right concentration, which refers directly to the practice of meditation. At its core, meditation calms and focuses the mind so that it can experience true insight. And true insight is simply seeing things exactly as they are, with a view that is not distorted by our biases, our desires, and yes, our fears. Fear can warp reality faster than the Starship Enterprise from Star Trek. One of the revered symbols in Buddhism is the lotus flower. In Buddhist art, we often see a Buddha seated on a lotus flower. The lotus, as you know, is a water plant that takes nourishment from the slimy muck at the bottom of a pond and turns it into a beautiful flower. This is a commonly used Buddhist metaphor for transforming illusion into enlightenment. So let's examine a transformational method that can turn the worry that leads to fear into something a lot more positive. The first step is to see what's worrying you directly instead of shying away from it, and we do that a lot. We can't start to deal with the difficulty until we can address it and identify it precisely. We do this by calming down the mind, using whatever works for us. A good method is what we did earlier. Take the inhalation and exhale while relaxing the shoulders. Rinse and repeat for as long as it takes. Other calming techniques include chanting, either aloud or silently, same for prayer, gentle physical movements such as Tai Chi, Qigong, or yoga. Use what has worked for you in the past, but let it be the first thing you do. A calm mind has to be the bedrock of our efforts to deal with worry and fear. If the mind is shaky, we'll have difficulty doing what comes next. And maybe we'll find that we don't exactly know what's worrying us. In that case, we just simply acknowledge that we're suffering from worry. Remember, if you can't identify the difficulty directly, don't beat yourself up over it. A lot of people do that. Worry is a form of suffering, but so is beating yourself up. Suffering does not end suffering. The second step is to transform worry into concern. Try to observe what's going on as objectively as you possibly can. In teaching Buddhist meditation at our temple, we tell beginners to observe the object of their meditative practice without any commentary, recollection, or analysis. This is the Buddhist principle of non-attachment, simply letting externals go, keeping the mind focused, and returning to the object of meditation whenever anything takes you away from it. Just release fear of what you think may be happening as best as you can. There will probably be some emotional aftershocks, and that's okay. Worry is a very emotional thing, while concern is a bit more logical and practical. Think of it as worry light. As a concerned individual, we can identify what's going on with a bit more accuracy, even though there's still some emotion running in the background, which again is perfectly normal. The third step is to transform concern into understanding. Now that we've brought things down from worry to concern, we're able to see the situation from a growing number of angles. The true nature of the situation is starting to come into view. Seeing what's going on without a lot of the emotional baggage brings us a greater sense of equanimity. It's at this point when we're able to go from what if to what's this. There's always a measure of comfort to be experienced when we finally start getting down to the bottom of what's going on. The fourth step is to transform our understanding into compassion. We've already brought our head to the situation, now it's time to bring our heart into play. Wisdom, namely seeing the situation as it is, leads directly to compassion. In the Heart Sutra, which is chanted in Zen centers around the world every day, we see that Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, made use of her perceived and polished wisdom to open up her compassionate heart. She did this by seeing that all phenomena exist without having an absolutely discrete existence. In other words, that all things are interconnected while still maintaining their relative identities. This compassion and understanding can be applied to ourselves, and it can also be applied to others who may be the source of our original worries and fears. When we truly experience the power of the compassionate heart, our minds are freed, our fears are relieved, and we're ready to move on to the fifth step, transforming compassion into action. Any difficulty can be solved if we learn how to employ wisdom and compassion skillfully. A bodhisattva, as some of you may know, is a being to whom the suffering of all sentient beings is the number one concern. According to Buddhist lore, bodhisattvas even put off becoming fully enlightened Buddhas if even one sentient being is still suffering. While bodhisattvas are concerned about suffering beings, they're not worried or fearful. Instead, they are determined. A bodhisattva's main task is to save suffering beings using whatever means they may have at their disposal. This is the epitome of transforming compassion into action. At our temple, we chant the traditional 4 vows of the Bodhisattva. All living beings without limits we vow to save. Pain and distress without ending we vow to cut off. Dharma gates beyond counting we vow to master. Buddha paths without measure we vow to perfect. This is a Bodhisattva's mission statement. I will rescue as many suffering beings as I can while continuing to master the means by which I may do so. Transforming compassion into action is the vow of all Buddhists who profess to follow the path of the Bodhisattva. We rely on our altruistic vows to save, rescue, and comfort all beings, including ourselves, to do something about whatever's been worrying us. Now we're motivated and ready to do whatever is in our power to deal with the situation. The worry isn't so strong now, and the emotional pain is lessened, maybe even totally gone. We might think of these 5 steps as a kind of a triage approach. Observe the condition, stabilize the patient, analyze the problem, identify a treatment, and apply that treatment. This goes a long way toward making the patient's condition manageable. In terms of worry and fear, identify what's worrying us, calm down so we can change our worry into concern, let our concern turn into an objective understanding of the entire situation, use compassion to open up the heart, and let this compassion become the medicine that pacifies the heart and mind. Now we're truly transcending worry and fear, which allows us to skillfully deal with any situation we may encounter. In the famous science fiction novel Dune, which some of you may have read, the protagonist, Paul, uses a verse called the Litany Against Fear to get him through an excruciatingly painful situation. Among other things, it's a nice description of how to use the principle of non-attachment to deal with fear. The litany goes, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. The skillful use of wisdom and compassion can keep worries and fears from harming our mind and heart, bringing about a series of those little deaths that can keep us in a perpetual state of suffering. When we use our own inner eye to identify the source of our worries and fears, we stand a much better chance of saving ourselves as well as others. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's an increasingly fearful world. When people are fearful, they use fearful words, which come from fearful thoughts. Engaging in fearful rhetoric can create enemies. When enemies are created, a lot of lashing out occurs. When enough people lash out, it creates a climate of hatred, violence, and death. We have to stop this, and stop it now. Instead of giving in to the fears that others have insisted we should have, why not try to engage in any kind of dialogue? Those who disagree with us are not our enemies. They're people whose lives and experiences have molded their particular viewpoints. They're not subhuman. They're as human as we are, and they suffer in their various ways just as we do. If they are fearful, we can attempt to ease their fears. If they don't understand our viewpoint, we can peacefully explain it to them, not as a way of convincing them to join our side or putting them down, but to give them at least some sort of insight as to where we're coming from. This is how we start to create some degree of mutual understanding. And we're most effective at peacemaking when our own heart and mind are at peace. Getting beyond worries and fears is at the heart of this sort of an attitude. So, dipping back into science fiction one more time, you may recall Master Yoda's teaching on fear from the Star Wars movie, The Phantom Menace. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. This is where we're at as a society, and we need to do something about it. As I said earlier, there are at least as many ways of dealing with fear as there are fears to deal with. So let's use these ways to ease our own fears so that we may ease the fears of others. Then we can change the atmosphere of our society from the phantom menace to a new hope.
Once when my heart was passion-free to learn of things divine, the soul of nature suddenly outpoured itself in mine. I held the secrets of the deep and of the heavens above. I know the harmonies of sleep, the mysteries of love. And for a moment's interval, the earth and sky, the sea, my soul encompassed each and all as they encompass me.
Now bring your chalice close to extinguish it as I extinguish the chalice here. We extinguish our flames, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry with us until we meet again. And now our benediction.
For the sake of all sentient beings, we humbly extend these wishes. May all beings have true happiness. May all beings be freed from suffering and its causes. May all beings be one with the highest perfect joy, and may all beings dwell in equanimity, freed from discrimination and attachment.